I used to believe my daughter was my greatest blessing. Every time I looked at her, I saw my reason for living the one thing that made all the struggles worth it. I still remember the first time I held Emma in my arms. She was so small, so fragile, and when her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I promised her one thing, that I would never let anything hurt her. Back then, it was just the two of us. Her father, Daniel, had left before she even turned 2. He said he wasn't ready to be a family man. So it was me and Emma against the world, and I was fine with that. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep a roof over our heads. I'd clean offices at night, then bake bread for the local shop in the mornings. My hands were always tired, but my heart was full. Because every time I saw Emma smiling, it reminded me that love could grow even in the toughest soil. As Emma grew older, people would always tell me, "Grace, you've raised such a lovely girl," and I'd smile proudly, not knowing how true or how temporary those words would be. She was bright, charming, and ambitious. She wanted everything life had to offer, and I wanted nothing more than to give it all to her. When she wanted piano lessons, I found a way. When she needed a new dress for her graduation, I skipped my own meals to afford it. I kept telling myself, one day, all this sacrifice will be worth it. And for a long time, it did feel worth it. When she graduated from university, the first in our family, she hugged me and whispered, "Mom, I'll take care of you one day." Those words, they meant everything. But as time passed, something changed. At first, it was small things, missed phone calls, shorter visits, a tone that felt just a bit colder each time. She was busy, she said. Work was demanding. Life was moving fast. I understood. I told her, "It's okay, sweetheart. I know you have your own life now." But deep down, I missed her. The silence in the house grew heavier. The laughter that once filled these rooms faded into the sound of the clock ticking slowly, painfully. Still, I kept my promise. I never complained. Instead, I spent my days tending to my garden, cooking her favorite meals whenever she visited, pretending everything was fine. Then, one afternoon, Emma came home with a bright smile and a man beside her, Andrew, her boyfriend. He was charming, polite, and confident, the kind of man who made an impression the moment he walked into a room. "Mom," she said excitedly, "this is Andrew. He's in real estate." Real estate. The word seemed harmless at first, but now, when I look back, I realize that's when everything truly began. They sat at the table, laughing, whispering to each other, holding hands like young lovers do. I was happy for her, I really was. She looked radiant, alive. But there was something in Andrew's smile that made me uneasy. It was too smooth, too calculated. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being protective. After all, every mother worries when her child starts building a life that doesn't include her in every corner. Months passed, and their relationship grew serious. Emma started talking about buying a house, starting a family, and living comfortably. She mentioned money more often, how expensive everything was, how she wished things were easier. I remember saying softly, "You'll get there, sweetheart. You just have to be patient." She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I'd known since she was little. It was practiced. Then, one night, she brought up something that made my stomach twist. "Mom," she said, trying to sound casual, "have you ever thought about, retirement? Maybe moving somewhere smaller? You could sell this house, it's worth a lot now. You'd be comfortable for years." I laughed nervously. "This house? It's my life's work, Emma. Every brick, every wall. It's where you grew up." She smiled and said, "I know, Mom. I just want you to think about your future." But there was a flicker in her eyes, something cold, fleeting, almost hidden. For weeks, her visits became more frequent again. She'd bring groceries, cook with me, ask about the house documents, the bills, the repairs. At first, I was touched. I thought maybe she was reconnecting. But slowly, I began to notice patterns. Questions she shouldn't have cared about. Calls she took outside. whispers to Andrew that stopped when I entered the room. My heart started to ache with suspicion. I tried to silence it after all. She was my daughter, my own blood. But one night, I overheard her. She was in the kitchen, talking on the phone. Her voice was low, but I caught fragments. Yeah, she'll sign it soon. She trusts me completely. I froze. Sign what? I stayed silent, too afraid to move, too scared to know. When she walked out and saw me standing there, she smiled that same perfect practice smile. Oh, Mom. Didn't hear you there. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I really did. But my gut, that quiet voice that never lies, whispered otherwise. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like her mother. I felt like her target. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the walls of my home pressing in around me. I looked at the old photo of Emma her first day of school, missing front teeth, pigtails, and that innocent smile. Tears filled my eyes as one question echoed through my mind. When did love turn into calculation? The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't quite shake off. You know that feeling when something feels wrong, but you can't prove it yet? It was like walking into a familiar room and realizing that every object had been slightly moved. Nothing was broken, but nothing was the same. I made breakfast like usual: scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. But even as the aroma filled the kitchen, my appetite was gone. I sat there, staring at the sunlight cutting through the lace curtains, and all I could hear were her words echoing in my head. Yeah, she'll sign it soon. She trusts me completely. Trust. That word used to mean everything between us. Now, it tasted bitter. I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe it wasn't about the house. Maybe it was about something else entirely. But deep down, I knew. A mother always knows. Later that day, Emma stopped by again, cheerful as ever. "Morning, Mom. I brought you your favorite tea," she said, waving a little brown paper bag in her hand. Her smile was too bright, too rehearsed. "Oh, how sweet," I said softly, pretending not to notice the slight tremble in my hands as I poured the tea. She sat down, chatting about her job, her plans with Andrew, their future. It all sounded so perfect, too perfect. Then, out of nowhere, she brought it up again. "Mom," she began gently, "you know how much this house means to me. I grew up here. Every corner feels like home." I nodded, my heart tightening. She smiled faintly. "That's why I want to make sure it's protected. What if something happens to you? Don't you think it would be smart to put it in my name? Just legally, to keep things simple?" Her tone was soft, almost innocent, but her words cut through me like ice. I froze mid-sip. "Put it in your name?" She nodded, keeping her voice calm, controlled. "It's just paperwork, Mom. You'd still live here. Nothing would really change. It's just safer. Safer." That word echoed in my chest like a lie wrapped in silk. I smiled faintly, trying not to let my voice shake. "I'll think about it, sweetheart." Her smile widened, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before: relief. Like a plan was working. When she left that afternoon, I sat in silence for hours, staring at the walls I'd built with my own hands. The cracks in the paint, the squeaky floorboard by the hallway, every imperfection carried a memory. And suddenly, the idea of losing it all, not by fate but by betrayal, made my heart ache in ways I didn't know were possible. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, sweet and convincing. I started replaying the past months, the sudden kindness, the extra visits, the way she asked about my will just in case, she said once. At 3 a.m., I finally decided I needed to know the truth. The next morning, I went through my drawer where I kept all my documents. Deed papers, insurance, bills, everything was still there. But something felt off. A folder was missing. The one with the property appraisal documents. I sat there, cold dread spreading through me. When Emma came over again 2 days later, I decided to test her. "Sweetheart," I said casually, "do you know where I put the house valuation papers? I can't seem to find them." Her reaction was instant, a flicker in her eyes. Gone in a blink. "Oh, I don't think I've seen them. Maybe you misplaced them." I smiled faintly, pretending to agree. Yes, maybe I did. But that night, I found them. Not where they should have been, but in the glove compartment of her car. I had stepped outside to take the trash out and noticed her car door slightly ajar. I shouldn't have looked, but my heart pushed me forward. Inside, the folder was tucked under a stack of papers, and on top of it was a sticky note with Andrew's handwriting. It said, "Once she signs, we move fast." My knees went weak. I stumbled back inside, barely breathing. The truth I'd been trying to deny stood clear before me, my daughter. The child I'd sacrificed everything for was planning to take away the one thing I had left. The next few days passed in a blur. Every phone call, every smile from her felt like a performance. And I played along, because I needed to know how far they were willing to go. One evening, she invited me to dinner. "Andrew wants to talk to you," she said sweetly. "It's just about the future, Mom. Nothing serious." I agreed. But before I left, I slipped a small recorder into my purse. Something in me had shifted. The mother in me was still alive, but she was no longer naive. We met at a fancy restaurant, the kind I could never afford on my own. The lights were warm, the music soft, the perfect stage for polite lies. Andrew smiled as I sat down. "Grace, it's good to see you. You look wonderful." "Thank you," I said quietly, folding my hands. He leaned forward, charming as ever. "You've done such a great job raising Emma. You've built a beautiful home, and I know it means the world to you both." I nodded slowly, waiting. "That's actually what we wanted to talk about," he continued smoothly. "Emma and I are planning to invest in a new property, something long-term. But to make it work, we'd need your house under our name temporarily. Just for paperwork. Of course, you'd still live there." I stared at him, every word landing like a blow. "So," I asked softly, "you want me to give you my house?" Andrew smiled, unbothered. "It's just a technical thing. We'd make sure you're comfortable. You could even think of it as passing the torch." Passing the torch. I looked at my daughter then. She sat there silent. Her eyes darted to mine for a brief moment, and then she looked away. That was it. The final confirmation. I smiled faintly, my voice calm. "I see. Well, I'll think about it." Andrew grinned. "Take your time, Grace. We only want what's best for you." When I got home, I closed my door quietly and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me heavier than anything I'd ever felt. But beneath the hurt, something else began to rise. Something cold, sharp, and determined. I wasn't going to be their victim. Not after everything I'd endured, not after every sleepless night I'd worked to build this home. They thought I was weak. They thought my love would blind me forever. But they'd forgotten I'd survived alone once before. And this time, I wouldn't just survive. I'd make them remember who I was. Over the next week, I began to plan quietly. I met with an old friend of mine, Paul, who worked in real estate. I asked him simple questions, pretending curiosity. "Paul," I said lightly, "what happens if someone transfers their property but the paperwork isn't done properly?" He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Oh, they'd be in trouble." "But why do you ask?" I smiled back. "Just curious." Then I asked something else. "If I wanted to sell my house quickly, quietly, how long would it take?" He raised a brow. "Depends on the buyer. But I could help, if you're serious." I nodded. "I think I might be." That night, I sat by the window watching the moonlight pour across the floor. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. In its place was purpose. I realized something powerful. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be cruel or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, and precise. Emma and Andrew thought they were setting a trap for me. But little did they know. The game had already begun, and I wasn't the pawn anymore. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Because I finally knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to lose my home. I wasn't going to beg for their love. And I definitely wasn't going to be the helpless mother they thought I was. They wanted to play with my trust. Then I'd teach them what happens when you underestimate the woman who built everything they stand on. Once I decided I would not be a victim, everything else became a series of small, careful moves. I didn't want drama. I didn't want theatrics. I wanted something precise, like a clock turning, one careful tick at a time. That's how I'd built this house. Slow, steady, brick by brick. I would undo their plan the same way. The first thing I did was breathe. Sounds simple, I know, but when someone you love betrays you, your head spins. You want to shout, to plead, to bargain. I did none of that. I sat at my kitchen table with my morning tea and wrote a list. Not of what they'd done, but of what I needed. Documents. A buyer. Proof. Patience. I called Paul again, the old friend at the real estate office, but this time I didn't pretend. "Paul," I said, letting the weariness creep into my voice like truth, "I want to sell the house. Quietly. At market value. No fuss." There was a long pause. "Grace, are you sure? That house has your history." "I'm sure," I said. "Help me." He came by the next afternoon with a folder and a calm expression. We sat in my living room, the furniture arranged just how it had been for decades, and he explained the steps. He spoke in practical terms about appraisals, escrow accounts, and closing timelines. He offered options: an open listing, a private sale, a friendly investor who handled quick moves. I listened to every word as if learning a new language. "What about Emma?" he asked finally, with the caution of someone who knew small towns and family names. "She won't be involved," I said. "Not yet." Paul's eyebrows rose. He respected me too much to press. He cared for the town, for the people. But he also knew who I was and that I was not a woman to be shoved into corners. He promised to find a discreet buyer and to help me protect the amount of money I'd built for years. Next, I put my house in order, not because I was ashamed of anything, but because you always do things cleanly when you want the truth to stand on its own. I cleaned every shelf, not to hide anything, but to remind myself what I'd built with my hands and late nights. I made a small inventory of important items: the old wedding ring I'd pawned years ago and never reclaimed, the photo albums, the little ceramic rooster my grandmother gave me. I wrote them down, not to show them off, but to remember what I might take with me if I needed to leave one day. I also recorded. There was a little recorder in my purse now whenever Emma visited, but I didn't use it on every word. I don't want people to think I was plotting theatrics. I wasn't. The recorder was for clarity, for evidence, for the cold reality of words said under the warm lights of my kitchen when hearts were not as honest as they should be. I met an attorney in town, a quiet man named Sanchez. He didn't wear flamboyant suits or make promises he couldn't keep. He asked simple questions and listened without judgment. I told him my plan: to sell the home and transfer the funds into an account that would keep me secure, to ensure the buyer was legitimate, and to handle the process in a way that would not require Emma's signature unless she was on title. He nodded. "Everything you have built is yours, Miss Rivera. The law will respect that." Hearing those words was like someone finally telling me I had rights I hadn't let myself remember. Rights I'd been blind to while pouring love into my family. Once the legal side was in motion, I turned to the emotional strategy. Because a plan without patience will bend. Emma and Andrew were not fools. If they suspected anything early, they'd accelerate. So I slowed. I became warmer and more available. I cooked the meals she loved. I invited them for dinners. I laughed at Andrew's jokes and listened to his plans. All of this was theater, but it was honest theater because I had once loved both of them truly. That is the part people don't understand. The strength it takes to be generous when you could burn bridges. You are often expected to scream when hurt, but sometimes the quieter option, the calm one, makes the wound closer to the light. I let them see me calm. I let them believe I trusted. They did. They relaxed. They thought the trap had worked. There were small triumphs along the way. I asked Emma to help me with a small repair to the roof, something simple that required standing together on a ladder under a cloudy sky. She took my hand to steady me, and in that moment I felt the old reflex of mothering. I didn't complain. I allowed myself the small comfort of touch. But when she laughed and told Andrew later how easy it had been to convince me to sell, I listened and made a small mental note. They were careless. That carelessness would be their undoing. Paul found a buyer 2 months into the plan. Not a flashy developer, but a retired couple who wanted a quieter life and loved old houses. They adored the garden and the way the morning light fell into the study. They were discreet. They were genuine. They wanted a home, not a headline. Their name was Helen and George Martinez, kind, gray-haired, gentle people who promised to keep the house as I had loved it. When Paul told me they'd made an offer at market price, I felt something odd relief mixed with a strange sorrow. This house had been my life's work, Yes, but it was also evidence that someone who builds quietly can sell quietly. There is a dignity in that. We began the paperwork with the attorney. Graceful, simple, procedural. The escrow account was set up in my name. A trust was drawn so that funds would become available without anyone, including Emma, being able to touch them immediately. That was the part Sanchez insisted on. "You're safeguarding your life, Ms. Rivera," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "This is not revenge. This is protection." While the legal machinery moved, I prepared for their reaction after the sale closed. It would come. People like Emma and Andrew expect instant compliance. They expect others to bend. They lived in a world where transaction replaces conversation. So I rehearsed calm replies. "This is my decision," I would say. I wanted a simple life, and this gives me that. I practice not letting their anger make me small. The first time they noticed anything was subtle. Emma called one afternoon, voice bright. "Mom, are you going to meet Andrew's mother this weekend? She lives nearby and thought it would be great if you both had coffee." I could have declined, said I was busy, been coy, but instead I answered, I'd love to meet her. It was true. I had nothing to hide, and perhaps that truth is what made them suspicious. People who hide things project suspicion. People who are honest often fool the greedy because honesty feels like weakness. As the closing date approached, Emma started asking questions again. "Mom, why are you so interested in Paul's renovation tips? Are you serious about moving?" She sounded like she was testing for cracks. I smiled and said, "Oh, I like to keep busy. There's always something to do." They came by more often, bringing casseroles and polite smiles, but their eyes were sharper now, and the laughter felt forced. The day the sale closed, the house hummed with an ordinary summer noon. I was making tea when Paul called me. He had the quiet voice of a man who knows good news. "Grace," he said, "everything is completed. The Martinezes will take possession in 30 days. The funds will be moved to the account you authorized." I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't known since Daniel left a quiet, private victory. This was not to humiliate Emma or Andrew. This was to secure my future, to make sure I was not at the mercy of their plans. I told them nothing, not yet. I waited the appropriate moment. A week later, I invited them for dinner with all the casual cheer I could muster. They came, thinking perhaps they had more time to convince me to reconsider. Andrew brought wine. Emma arrived in a dress she knew I liked. We sat down to the table, and I served the roast I'd been perfecting for years. Conversation flowed trivial, pleasant, with a current of tension underneath. After dessert, as the night wound down and the clock ticked toward 10, I cleared my throat. "There is something I want to tell you," I said, keeping my voice steady. Emma looked nervous, Andrew slightly impatient. "I have decided to sell the house." For a slice of time, everything froze. The fork Emma held hovered midway to her mouth. Andrew's face turned the exact color of a question. "Sell the house?" Emma repeated, like a woman reading a line in a play she hadn't memorized. "Yes," I said. "It's time. It's time for a change. I'm tired of keeping up a place that needs constant work. I want to move somewhere smaller. Helen and George will look after it." I kept my face calm. I let the words land like steady stones. Emma's reaction was not what I expected. She laughed first, a brittle false sound. "Mom, you can't be serious. You're giving it away." She tried to make it sound like concern, but that voice was nothing but strategy. "It's not a giveaway," I said. "It's a sale at market price. The right people will have it." I watched her jaw tighten. Andrew ran a hand across his face, a tiny seizure of rage. "Why? Why would you do that when—" Emma began, then stopped. She was hunting for words. "This is our family home." "It was my family home," I corrected softly. "It still is, and I decided. I built this life. I did not build it to be taken from me." I watched as their faces shifted through different shades: confusion, irritation, disbelief. Andrew tried to argue. "Grace, think about the practicalities. Where will you go? Who will manage you? This is impulsive. You can't—" "I can," I said. "I've planned." I didn't tell them about the trust, or Sanchez, or the quiet buyer who loved my garden. Their lives were full of shortcuts. Mine had been built by patient labor. That patience paid today. They left that night in a flurry. Their farewells were clipped, hollow, a legal team's pretense of civility. After the door shut, I sat in my quiet kitchen and let myself finally feel the relief. Clean, calm, dignified. In the days that followed, Emma called twice, each time testing. "Mom, please don't do this. Think of the future. Think of your retirement. This is reckless." I listened to her pleas as a doctor listens to a patient's fever with care, but with knowledge that sometimes the fever must run its course. "I appreciate your concern," I answered, "but this is my decision." They were incensed, of course. They had wanted ease, a home transferred, a life secured at no cost to them. What they did not expect was choice. They had expected me to be malleable, to do what their convenience demanded. I chose otherwise. There were whispers in our little town. People are good at gossip, even better at assigning blame. It was a lesson people will always try to turn the narrative to their comfort. But the truth stayed with me like an anchor. Every brick in that house had been placed by my hands. Every midnight spent worrying over bills had been my work. I would not be erased by greed masked as love. And quietly, as those weeks passed, the sale completed. Helen and George moved in with their boxes and small hands that wanted to prune my roses. The buyer loved the house the way I did, gently, with respect. The funds settled in my account exactly as the trust stated, secure and untouchable by others for a time. I had not stolen or trapped or cursed. I had protected myself. Emma never forgave me. She called me cold. She called me selfish. People who expect others to fix their mistakes often say ugly things when the world doesn't bend. I let the words pass like water over stone. They did not erode the truth that I had spent my life building my dignity. At night, I would walk the garden and see that the roses still bloomed, unbothered by the struggle inside. I'd sit on the old bench where Daniel and I had once planned a life that never came to be, and I'd smile. I had been foolish once, yes, but never again. I did not win by spite. I won by quiet certainty and patience. They had thought me a soft thing to be taken, but I was the opposite, steady as the mortar between bricks. That steadiness taught them a lesson they would not forget. While my heart had been broken, my spirit was not. I had learned a truth every woman learns in small, private ways. You can be gentle and still be formidable. You can be loving and still protect yourself. And in that stillness, I found my power. There's a certain peace in watching things fall apart when you know you no longer have anything to lose. It's not bitterness. It's not satisfaction. It's the strange, quiet comfort that comes from knowing this time. It's not your mess to fix. I had spent decades cleaning up after Emma. Small lies, impulsive mistakes, bad decisions hidden behind sweet smiles. But this time, I stood still. I didn't reach for the broom. I didn't offer the comforting words. I just watched. And that's how the reckoning began. It started with a phone call, not from Emma, not from Andrew, but from a mutual friend of theirs, a woman named Valerie. She sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure she should even be calling me. "Grace, I thought you should know," she began. "Andrew's company's under investigation. Something about forged financial documents." I didn't react right away. I just listened, the tea in my hand slowly cooling. "And Emma?" I asked finally. She's trying to handle it, but people are talking. She hasn't been to work in days." "Thank you, Valerie," I said calmly. "I appreciate you telling me." After I hung up, I sat for a long time in silence. My mind wasn't racing, my heart wasn't heavy. It was strange I'd spent so long bracing for pain that now, when it arrived for someone else, I only felt acceptance. It wasn't that I wanted them to suffer. No. It's just that, for once, life was balancing its own scales without my interference. That night I stepped outside and looked at the stars. The ocean breeze carried that familiar salt scent. I whispered quietly, "You can't build peace on lies." And then I went inside, turned off my phone, and slept better than I had in months. A few days later, Emma showed up unannounced again. But this time, she didn't look like my polished, confident daughter. Her hair was unkempt, eyes red and swollen. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Mom, everything's falling apart." I gestured for her to sit, but she stayed standing, pacing like a caged bird. "They froze Andrew's accounts," she said quickly. His business partners threatening to go public. People are saying he falsified signatures, including yours. That last part made me pause. Mine? I asked. She nodded, tears spilling. Apparently, there were old documents from when he tried to take out that loan for the property. He said he just needed your signature for valuation forms, but they weren't. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to outsmart me, Andrew had gone one step too far, leaving evidence of his deceit in plain sight. "Mom," Emma said, voice breaking, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." For a moment, I wanted to believe her. The way she looked small, lost, desperate, it almost fooled me. But then I remembered the quiet dinners, the fake smiles, the lies she'd told so easily before. "You knew enough," I said softly. Her lip quivered. "Please, Mom, you have to help us. You have to tell them you didn't sign anything, that it's all a misunderstanding." I tilted my head. "It is a misunderstanding, Emma. His." Her eyes widened. "You can't just let this happen to him." I gave a small, sad smile. "I'm not letting anything happen. He's facing what he created." She sank into the chair finally, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, I saw her not as my daughter, not as the child I raised, but as a grown woman staring at the consequences of her own choices. It hurt. God, it hurt to see her that way. But pain isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's the only teacher that works. 2 days later, Andrew called me. Not a text, not a message, an actual phone call. "Grace," he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading, "I need to talk to you. Please." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a cafe downtown Neutral Ground. When he walked in, he looked like a man stripped of his armor. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He sat down slowly, not even trying to fake confidence. "I made mistakes," he began. "I thought I was doing what was best for Emma, for both of you." "For us?" I asked calmly. He nodded. "She was scared you'd lose everything, and I wanted to protect her future. So I took matters into my own hands." "By forging my name?" I asked, voice still soft but sharper now. He winced. "I didn't think it'd go that far. It was just supposed to be a simple transfer, temporary, until we got the funds." I shook my head slowly. "You built a future for her out of someone else's life." "Mine." He looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly. Sorry doesn't erase intent," I said quietly. "You saw me as an obstacle, not family. And now you're paying for that choice." He exhaled, defeated. "They're saying I could lose my license, Grace. My entire career." I looked at him for a long time before replying. "Maybe that's what happens," I said, "when you build a life on stolen trust." He nodded slowly, stood up, and left without another word. And that was the last time I saw him. In the weeks that followed, everything unraveled in slow motion. Andrew's firm distanced itself. Emma's friends stopped answering her calls. She'd built a world around his status, his confidence, and now that it was gone, she didn't know who she was without it. I'd see her name in local whispers, online threads. "Did you hear about Andrew and Emma?" Apparently her mom's signature was involved. She must be mortified. I didn't correct them. I didn't add to it. I simply stayed silent. Because silence, I'd learned, is louder than any defense. It forces truth to echo. Emma tried calling several times after that, but I didn't answer right away. I wasn't cruel. I was cautious. Forgiveness without growth is just permission for repetition. Finally, after weeks of distance, I agreed to see her again. She came to my cottage one evening, holding a small box in her hands. Her face was pale, her voice fragile. "I wanted to give this back," she said. "It's the necklace you gave me for graduation." I looked at the box, but didn't reach for it. "Why?" "Because I don't deserve it," she said quietly. "Not after everything." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The necklace wasn't about the gold or the gift, it was about a promise I'd made that day. That no matter how far she went, she'd always have a piece of home. And now, here she was, returning that promise, ashamed of what she'd become. I finally spoke. "You know, Emma, when I gave you that necklace, I didn't expect perfection. I expected honesty. That's all I ever wanted from you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was stupid. I let ambition turn into greed. I thought we were securing our future. but all we did was destroy it. I sighed. You can rebuild, but not if you keep carrying guilt like armor. She shook her head. I don't know how. You start, I said softly, by owning your mistakes and facing the world without excuses. She nodded slowly. And you? Can you ever forgive me? I paused, then took her hand. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Emma. Trust is. Forgiveness I've already given. Trust you'll have to earn. She cried, then not the angry, dramatic kind of tears. Real ones. The kind that come from finally seeing yourself clearly. And for the first time, I held her. Not as a mother rescuing her child, but as a woman comforting another woman who had finally understood the cost of betrayal. Over the next few months, things settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Andrew faced legal repercussions but avoided jail time through a settlement. He moved out of state, leaving Emma behind to pick up the pieces. She found a small apartment, got a modest job at a design firm, and started therapy. I could see the humility growing in her, not forced, but earned. We spoke occasionally, carefully, like two people learning to trust language again. Sometimes she'd say, I don't know how you stayed so calm through all of this. And I'd smile. Because peace isn't something people give you, Emma. It's something you build after they've tried to break it. She'd nod, and in those moments I saw flickers of the girl she used to be, curious, kind, sincere. The one I thought I'd lost. Maybe, in a way, we both needed to break to rebuild differently. Months later, as spring returned, she invited me to her new place for dinner. It wasn't fancy, just pasta, a salad, and soft music playing in the background, but it felt honest. We laughed, reminisced, and for the first time in a long time, there were no masks, no manipulation, no pretending. Before I left, she handed me a note. I wrote something, she said shyly. Just read it when you get home. That night I opened it. Her handwriting was shaky but sincere. Mom, I used to think power was about control. But now I know real power is being able to look someone in the eye after you've hurt them and say, I was wrong. You didn't just teach me a lesson. You showed me grace in every sense of your name. I love you, Emma. I folded the letter carefully, placed it beside my bed, and whispered into the quiet room. That's all I ever wanted to hear. You see, revenge doesn't always come dressed in fury. Sometimes it comes in the form of self-respect. Sometimes it's the quiet reclaiming of your story, the refusal to be small just to keep others comfortable. Emma thought she could rewrite my ending, but I didn't need revenge to win. All I needed was peace and the courage to protect it. And in that peace, she found her own awakening. Because sometimes the greatest punishment is watching the person you tried to break become stronger than ever and still choose forgiveness over fury. That's the real reckoning. There's a strange quiet that follows chaos. When the shouting stops, when the lies settle into silence, all that's left is the echo of what used to be. For weeks after the confrontation, I lived in that silence. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. The kind of quiet that allows you to finally hear your own heart again. I started noticing things I'd forgotten about: the smell of morning coffee, the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains, the simple pleasure of sitting by the window without checking my phone. For years, I had been living on alert, waiting for the next crisis, the next betrayal, the next heartbreak. But now, for the first time in decades, there was nothing left to brace for, and in that stillness I began to rebuild. Healing isn't a sudden moment. It's not a sunrise. It's more like the slow change of seasons, so gradual, you barely notice it happening. At first I filled my days with small rituals. Morning walks, fresh flowers every Friday, a journal by my bed. I wrote not about the pain, but about release. Every page began with the same line. Today, I choose peace. Sometimes I believed it. Sometimes I didn't. But I wrote it anyway because the act of choosing, even on the hardest days, was a reminder that I still had control over something. Emma would call once a week. Our conversations were cautious but kind. There were pauses, awkward silences like stepping across a bridge that wasn't fully built yet. But each time, we made it a little further. She'd tell me about her new job, the small design projects she was working on, the way she'd started volunteering at a community center. There was a sincerity in her tone I hadn't heard in years. And sometimes she'd just say, "Mom, thank you for still answering the phone." And I'd reply softly, "Thank you for still calling." Because forgiveness isn't just saying, "I forgive you." It's showing up again and again, even when it still hurts a little. One afternoon, I was in town when I overheard a conversation at the cafe. Two women sitting by the window, whispering over their lattes. "Did you hear about Andrew?" One of them said. "He moved. They say he's consulting for some firm overseas now." The other replied. "And Emma, poor thing. I always thought she was too good for all that drama." I smiled faintly to myself. It was strange hearing their names like they belonged to another story, one I used to live in, but no longer did. For so long, I'd been defined by other people's mistakes. By the labels they gave me: the naive mother, the abandoned wife, the woman who lost everything. But now, I wasn't any of those things. I wasn't the woman he betrayed anymore. I was simply Grace. And maybe that was enough. As I walked home, I stopped by a small art gallery near the boardwalk. Inside, there was a painting that caught my eye, a cracked vase with golden lines running through it. A small card below it read, "Kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending with gold. The flaw becomes the beauty." I stood there for a long time, just looking. Because that was it. That's what life had done to me. To Emma, to all of us. We'd been broken, yes, but we'd mended, not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with something stronger. It was late autumn when the past decided to test me one last time. I was returning from the grocery store when I found an envelope tucked under my door. No name, no address, just one word written in sharp black ink. "Sorry." I opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. "From Andrew. Grace, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted to say thank you, not for forgiveness, but for silence. You could have ruined me completely, but you didn't. I see now that your strength wasn't in what you said, but what you chose not to. I hope one day Emma understands the kind of woman she comes from." Andrew, I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. There was no anger left in me, just closure. That letter wasn't an apology. It was a confession, a quiet admission that even the guilty can recognize grace when they see it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need sequels. Some lessons are already complete. By the time winter rolled around, Emma had started visiting regularly again. She'd bring homemade soup, small gifts, or sometimes just herself, tired but smiling. One night, as we sat by the fire, she said something that caught me off guard. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm scared to be happy again. Every time I start feeling good, I remember what I did and it ruins it." I reached over, holding her hand. "That's because you're still confusing punishment with growth." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "What do you mean?" "Punishment keeps you stuck in the past," I explained softly. "Growth allows you to carry the lesson forward. You've done enough punishing, Emma. It's time to live." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Do you really think I can?" "I don't think," I said, smiling. "I know." And that night, as she hugged me goodbye, I could feel the difference. The embrace wasn't desperate anymore. It was healing. Spring came again, bringing warmth and color back into everything. I decided to renovate the garden, the same one Emma and I used to tend together when she was little. As I dug through the soil, I found an old, rusted locket, probably something from years ago, lost in the dirt. Inside, it was a faded picture of me holding her as a toddler, both of us smiling. It felt poetic, like the earth had been holding on to that memory for me, waiting for the right moment to return it. That afternoon, Emma came over unexpectedly. I showed her the locket, and she gasped. "Oh my God, I remember this. You used to wear it all the time." "I thought it was gone forever," I said. She smiled. "Maybe it just wanted to come back when we were ready." I laughed softly. "Maybe you're right." And that's when I realized this was what healing really looked like. Not grand gestures or apologies. Just small moments, rooted in love, blooming again after a long winter. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a lawyer, Andrews, apparently. He explained that Andrew had left the country permanently, and before leaving, he'd made a formal statement clearing my name of any involvement in the forgery. He wanted me to know I was officially in the clear, not that I needed validation. But still, After I hung up, I sat for a moment staring at the waves outside. There was a strange finality in it, as if the last loose thread of that old life had finally been tied off. I whispered to myself, "No more ghosts." And for the first time, I believed it. Months passed. Life found a rhythm again. Emma began a new project designing homes for single mothers trying to rebuild their lives. She said it was inspired by me. One evening, she invited me to an event, a small fundraiser at her firm. I didn't want to go at first, but she insisted. When I walked in, I saw her standing on stage, confident and composed, speaking to the crowd. This project, she said, is about second chances. About women who lost everything and still found the strength to start over. My mother taught me that real strength isn't in revenge. It's in resilience. The audience applauded. I felt tears rise, not of sadness but of pride. When our eyes met, she smiled through the lights. And I knew. We had both come full circle. Later that night, after everyone left, Emma and I stood by the ocean. The moon reflected on the water, soft, silver, endless. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No. If they had, you might never have learned who you are, and I might never have remembered who I was." She smiled faintly. "You really don't hate me, do you?" I took her hand. "Sweetheart, hate is heavy. I don't have room for that anymore." She laughed softly through tears. "I don't deserve you." I looked at her, eyes soft but steady. Then become the kind of woman who does. She nodded, and in that simple gesture, I saw everything I'd been waiting for. Understanding. Redemption. Love. People often ask me, "Grace, after everything they did, how did you not destroy them?" And I always say the same thing because I didn't need to. You see, revenge burns fast like fire. It gives you warmth, but it leaves ashes behind. Grace, though. Grace rebuilds. It doesn't erase what happened. It just refuses to let it define you. My silence was my strength. My peace was my power. And my forgiveness, that was my freedom. Andrew lost his wealth. Emma lost her illusions. But me, I found myself, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Sometimes I still walk by the old house, the one they tried to claim as their own. It's been sold now, repainted, with new owners who don't know its history. I stand across the street and smile. Because that house was never about bricks and walls, it was about the foundation underneath. And that foundation was always mine. Built on love, on lessons, on truth. I whisper to the wind, "You can take the house. You can take the money. But you'll never take the woman who survived it all." Then I turn, walking back toward my small cottage by the sea, the place I chose, not the one I was left with. And as the sun sets behind me, I realize something beautiful. I didn't just survive betrayal. I transformed it into something strong enough to heal generations. That is the real aftermath. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. What once burned like fire eventually settles into warmth, not because you forget, but because you finally understand. Years had passed since that night when everything fell apart. The lies, the betrayal, the broken trust they had once felt like permanent scars. But now, when I looked back, they felt like lessons carved into my heart, reminders of who I became because of them. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was grateful. Grateful that life had stripped me down so completely that I had no choice but to rebuild myself from the ground up. My mornings were simple now. I'd wake before sunrise, brew my coffee, and step outside to watch the ocean glow with the first light of day. The sound of the waves had become my favorite kind of silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, just peaceful. The cottage I lived in was small but full of meaning. Every piece of furniture had a story. Every photo, a memory. This wasn't the life I planned, but it was the life I chose, and that made all the difference. I'd started painting again. Not professionally, not for anyone else, just for me. Sometimes the canvases were just streaks of color and light, abstract emotions I couldn't quite name. But when I stood back, I could always see hope hiding in the brushstrokes. Emma visited often now. She'd bring flowers, groceries, or just a smile and a bottle of wine. We'd talk for hours, not about the past, but about everything that came after her projects, her dreams, her new relationships. She was different now, softer but stronger. And every time she left, I'd watch her drive away with a sense of quiet pride. Because the woman she was becoming wasn't the girl who once betrayed me. She was the woman who had faced her mistakes and grown through them. One afternoon, Emma arrived with a surprise, a small box wrapped in white paper. "Open it," she said, eyes glimmering with that same nervous excitement she had as a child. Inside was a framed photo, me, her, and her grandmother. It was taken the year before my mother passed. We were in the garden, laughing about something silly, hands covered in dirt and flowers. "I found it in an old album," Emma said softly. "I wanted you to have it." I traced the edges of the frame, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Your grandmother would have loved to see you now." Emma smiled sadly. "She was the one who taught you to be so strong, wasn't she?" I nodded. "She taught me that love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It means standing tall even when your heart feels small." She exhaled. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." I looked at her, truly looked, and said, "You did. The hard way, maybe. But you learned." There was a silence between us, then the good kind. The kind where forgiveness lives quietly, breathing between words. After Emma left that evening, I found myself rummaging through an old wooden drawer in my study, the one filled with letters I'd written but never mailed. Among them was an envelope addressed to Emma, written years ago, back when the pain was fresh and sharp. The ink was slightly faded, but my handwriting was steady, calm, deliberate. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Emma, one day you'll understand why I chose silence over anger. You'll think I was weak for not fighting louder, but strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and waits. I didn't sell the house out of revenge. I did it to free myself from the walls that held too many ghosts. I hope that when you look back, you see not the mother who lost everything but the woman who refused to lose herself. Love, Mom. I never sent it." Because by the time she was ready to understand, she didn't need the letter, she had already seen the truth. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Some words are meant to be written, not read. They serve their purpose just by existing. One crisp autumn morning, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw a young woman standing there, maybe in her mid-20s, with the same nervous smile I once saw in Emma's eyes. "Are you Mrs. Grace Turner?" she asked politely. "Yes, I am," I said. "How can I help you?" She hesitated, then handed me an envelope. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm doing a research project about local housing stories, and your name came up in a few legal archives. I hope that's okay?" I smiled faintly. "Ah, the infamous Turner House scandal." Her cheeks flushed. "You know about it?" "Oh, I know it very well," I chuckled. "I lived it." She looked surprised. "Wait, you're that Grace Turner? The woman who sold her own house after a family dispute?" "That's me," I said, motioning her to sit, though I prefer to think of it as liberating my peace of mind. We laughed, and for the next hour I told her the story not with bitterness, but with warmth. Not about betrayal, but about freedom. By the end, she said quietly, "That's incredible. You turned something painful into something powerful." I smiled. "That's what women do, dear. We take the ashes and make art out of them." When she left, I watched her go, and it hit me. Maybe that was the real reason behind all of it. Not just for Emma to learn a lesson, but for me to leave something behind, a story, a truth, a spark for someone else's courage. Months later, Emma came to me with news that made my heart swell. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "I'm opening a new foundation for women who've lost their homes in legal battles or manipulation. It's called the Grace Project." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. My chest ached, not from sadness, but from a love too big to contain. "You're naming it after me?" I finally asked, voice trembling. She smiled. "Not after you, for you, because you showed me what grace really looks like." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I hugged her tight. All the pain, all the distance, all the broken trust, it had led us here. To this, to a legacy not of revenge but of renewal. One sunny afternoon, Emma and I decided to visit the old Turner house together. It had been years since either of us had seen it. The new owners had remodeled it, painted it a soft cream color, and filled the garden with roses. Standing at the gate, I felt something stir inside me, not regret, not longing, just peace. Emma touched my arm. Do you ever miss it? I shook my head. No, because a house isn't a home unless the people inside it love each other. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that now. As we turned to leave, the new owner, a middle-aged woman, stepped out and waved. Are you Grace Turner? She asked. Yes, I said, surprised. She smiled. I just wanted to say, your story inspired me. My sister went through something similar, and when she read about what you did, she finally walked away from her toxic marriage. I blinked, stunned. You know about that? Oh, everyone does, the woman laughed softly. You're sort of a local legend. Emma chuckled. See, Mom? You're famous for being fearless. I smiled. No, darling. Not fearless, just done being afraid. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Emma asked, Mom, do you ever think about Dad? I took a long breath. Sometimes, but not the way I used to. How so? She asked. I used to think about what he did, I said quietly. Now I just think about what I learned. He taught me what manipulation looks like, what silence costs, and what self-worth feels like once you stop begging for it. Emma looked down, thoughtful. You know, I used to think revenge meant getting even, but you showed me it means getting free. I smiled softly. Exactly, revenge is temporary. Freedom is forever. We sat there for a while, just listening to the waves in the distance. And I realized that the same ocean that had witnessed my pain had now become the witness to my peace. Weeks later, Emma invited me to the grand opening of the Grace Project. The room was filled with women, some young, some older, each carrying their own story of loss and renewal. When Emma took the stage, she introduced me to the crowd. This, she said, is my mother, the woman who taught me that grace isn't weakness. It's the quiet kind of power that rebuilds what others tried to break. She smiled faintly. You really don't hate me, do you? I took her hand. Sweetheart, hate is heavy. I don't have room for that anymore. She laughed softly through tears. I don't deserve you. I looked at her, eyes soft but steady. Then become the kind of woman who does. She nodded, and in that simple gesture, I saw everything I'd been waiting for. Understanding. Redemption. Love. People often ask me, Grace, after everything they did, how did you not destroy them? And I always say the same thing, because I didn't need to. You see, revenge burns fast like fire. It gives you warmth, but it leaves ashes behind. Grace, though, grace rebuilds. It doesn't erase what happened. It just refuses to let it define you. My silence was my strength. My peace was my power. And my forgiveness? That was my freedom. Andrew lost his wealth. Emma lost her illusions. But me, I found myself. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. Sometimes I still walk by the old house, the one they tried to claim as their own. It's been sold now, repainted, with new owners who don't know its history. I stand across the street and smile. Because that house was never about bricks and walls, it was about the foundation underneath. And that foundation was always mine, built on love, on lessons, on truth. I whispered to the wind, you can take the house, you can take the money, but you'll never take the woman who survived it all. Then I turn, walking back toward my small cottage by the sea, the place I chose, not the one I was left with. And as the sun sets behind me, I realize something beautiful. I didn't just survive betrayal. I transformed it into something strong enough to heal generations. That is the real aftermath. The audience applauded, and I felt something inside me settle as if my heart had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were full of tears. Mrs. Turner, she said, I just wanted to say thank you. I left an abusive situation because of a video your daughter shared about your story. You gave me hope. I took her hands gently, then promised me something give that hope to someone else someday. She nodded, crying softly, I will. And that's when I understood what legacy really means. It's not about wealth or property or names etched in stone. It's about the impact that ripples quietly through others long after you've stopped speaking. Later that night, Emma and I walked along the beach again just like we had years ago when everything between us was broken. Only this time, we walked side by side, no more distance, no more unspoken pain. "Mom," she said, "I used to think I'd ruined everything." I smiled. "You did, a little. But then you rebuilt it better." She laughed through tears. "You always find a way to make everything sound poetic." "That's because pain becomes poetry once you survive it," I said quietly. She squeezed my hand. "Do you think we're finally okay?" I looked at her, my daughter, my mirror, my second chance, and said, "Yes, Emma. We're better than okay. We're whole." Years later, when people asked me how I survived it all, the lies, the betrayal, the loss, I'd smile and say, "Because I chose to let my pain end with me, not begin with me." That was my legacy. Not revenge, not bitterness, just peace, passed down like a quiet inheritance. And as I sat on my porch one final evening, the sky painted in gold and violet hues, I thought about all the women who'd walk through the doors of the Grace Project, each carrying her own heartbreak, each about to find her own strength. And I whispered to the wind, "May they all learn what was meant to break you can build you instead." Because in the end, that's what life had taught me. That betrayal may shatter you, but grace, real grace, puts you back together in ways you never imagined. And as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I smiled softly. My legacy wasn't in the house I lost. It was in the hearts I helped rebuild. They say time heals all wounds. I used to think that was just something people said when they didn't know what else to say. Because time alone doesn't heal, understanding does. And I had to live long enough, cry long enough, and forgive deep enough to finally understand. Years had passed since the storm that tore my life apart. The house, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of it had once been my entire world. But now it was simply a story, a chapter in a book that had so much more to say. I was no longer the woman who waited for love to come home. I was the woman who built her own peace and called it enough. It was early morning when I woke up that day, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the ocean humming its usual lullaby beyond the window. I sat with my coffee on the porch, watching the gulls trace the sky. Everything felt softer now, even the memories. They no longer carried pain, just meaning. I opened my old journal, the same one I had written in when I was at my lowest. The first page still read, "I don't know who I am anymore." But as I turned the pages, I saw how my handwriting had changed, the shaky letters growing steadier, the angry words giving way to calm reflection. Until finally, the last page said, "I know who I am now." And that's enough. A smile crept across my lips. I didn't realize when the transformation happened only that it did. Maybe that's how healing works. Quietly, gradually. Until one day, you wake up and realize the past doesn't define you anymore. That morning, my phone buzzed. It was Emma. Her voice was bright, excited. "Mom, the board approved the expansion. The Grace Project is going nationwide." I could hear the pride in her tone, the joy in her words. "That's wonderful, darling," I said softly. "You've made something incredible." "No, we did," she said. "You gave me the story. I just gave it wings." I chuckled. "Wings were always yours, Emma. You just had to remember how to use them." There was a pause. Then she said, "I was thinking, maybe we should record your story. Not as gossip or scandal, but as a message. A film, maybe. Something to show women they can start again." I thought about it for a moment. A film. My story, our story, turned into a voice for others. It felt strange but right. "All right," I said finally. "If it helps even one woman find her strength, then it's worth sharing." She laughed. "You'll be amazing on camera." I smiled. "Oh, I won't be on camera, sweetheart. My voice is enough." And as I hung up, I realized maybe my story wasn't ending after all. Maybe it was just beginning again in someone else's heart. Weeks later, a small production team came to my cottage. Cameras, microphones, notebooks, they set everything up in the cozy living room filled with sunlight and old photographs. The director asked, "Grace, are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said. "I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it." They began rolling, and I started to speak slowly at first, then freely. I talked about the early days, the love, the laughter, the dreams, then about the silence, the distance, the betrayal that came like thunder on a clear day. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Because I wasn't telling a story of pain, I was telling one of power. When I finished, there was silence in the room. Even the crew strangers who didn't know me sat with tears in their eyes. The director whispered, "That was beautiful." I smiled. Pain always is, once you've survived it. Months later, Emma invited me to the premiere of the documentary. It was titled, Grace, the Woman Who Chose Herself. The small theater was packed. Journalists, survivors, supporters all gathered to hear my voice tell the story that had once nearly broken me. As the lights dimmed and my narration began, I felt my heart tremble. Hearing my voice echo in that space, calm, steady, full of experience, was surreal. There was a time when I thought forgiveness meant letting someone hurt you again. But I learned that forgiveness is just the moment you decide the pain ends with you. The audience listened in silence. When the film ended, there was a long pause, then applause, slow but strong, growing until it filled the entire room. Emma squeezed my hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mom, they love you." I smiled. "No, darling. They love the truth." And that's what I gave them. In the days after the premiere, I started receiving letters, dozens of them, from women I had never met from across the country, even other countries. One letter read, "I was in a relationship where I lost myself completely. Your story gave me the courage to walk away and start over. Thank you for reminding me that strength doesn't need to be loud." Another said, "I was angry for years at my mother. After watching your story, I finally called her and said I'm sorry." I read every letter, every word, each one a reminder that pain, when shared with purpose, becomes power. And I thought maybe this was why everything happened. Not to destroy me, but to prepare me, to make me a voice for those who still thought they had none. One afternoon, I received a call from a familiar voice. Deep, hesitant, uncertain. "Grace," the voice said. It was him. Ethan. For a moment, I froze. I hadn't heard that voice in over a decade. It felt like a ghost calling from another life. "Ethan," I said, my tone calm, almost detached. "It's been a long time." "Yes," he said softly. I saw your documentary." "Oh," I replied, "and what did you think?" There was a pause. "I think I didn't realize how much I broke you, or how much stronger you became after." I said nothing. I didn't need to. He continued, voice trembling. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, Grace, for everything. For the lies, for the manipulation, for making you doubt yourself." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in not as wounds, but as echoes. "I forgave you a long time ago, Ethan," I said quietly, "but not for you, for me." He exhaled. "You really are something else." "No," I said. "I just stopped being someone's second choice." And with that, I ended the call. I didn't feel anger, or sadness, or even relief, just peace. Because closure doesn't always come from others, sometimes it comes from within. Years rolled on and life slowed down again. My hair turned silver, my hands grew gentler, but my spirit stayed strong. Emma insisted on throwing a small celebration for my 70th birthday. Not a party she knew I hated big parties, but a gathering. Just family, friends, and a few women from the Grace Project. They decorated the garden with white lights and soft music. Laughter filled the air. The kind of laughter that feels like home. When Emma raised her glass for a toast, she said, "To my mother, Grace, the woman who taught me that love doesn't mean staying, and leaving doesn't mean giving up. It means knowing your worth, even when others forget it." Everyone clapped, and I felt tears blur my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I had lived long enough to see the cycle break. The pain that once poisoned our family had turned into purpose. That night, as the candles flickered and the sea whispered in the distance, I looked around at all those faces, women who had once felt powerless, now glowing with strength. And I thought, this is what healing looks like. A few months later, I sat at my desk again, that same wooden desk by the window, and began writing one last letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to the future. To the woman reading this, I don't know your name, or your pain. But I know this, you will survive it. Because you were never meant to stay broken. The world will tell you that forgiveness is weakness. Don't believe it. Forgiveness is the quiet power of setting yourself free. The ones who hurt you will go on with their lives. Let them. You have your own life to build one made not of fear, but of truth. Don't chase revenge. Chase peace, because peace lasts longer. And when you rebuild, don't rebuild to prove them wrong. Rebuild to remind yourself that you were right to begin with. Grace Turner. I sealed the letter, placed it in a small wooden box, and tucked it away in my bookshelf. Maybe someday Emma would find it. Or maybe a stranger would. Either way, it would reach whoever needed it most. That evening, I walked down to the beach one last time. The sun was dipping low, painting the horizon with gold and lavender. The waves lapped at my feet, cool and steady like time itself, whispering, "You did it." I thought about the girl I used to be, scared, hurt, unsure of her worth. And then about the woman I became, strong, calm, unshakable. I smiled to myself. Because maybe the greatest revenge wasn't proving someone wrong. Maybe it was becoming someone better without needing them to see it. As the sun disappeared beyond the water, I whispered one final thought to the wind. You can't lose what you've already let go. And in that moment, I knew the story was complete. Years later, after I was gone, Emma stood on that same beach, older now, but with the same fire in her eyes. The Grace Project had grown into an international movement, helping thousands of women rebuild their lives. Reporters asked her once, "What inspired all this?" And she said simply, "My mother didn't just teach me how to survive heartbreak. She taught me how to transform it." She smiled, looking toward the horizon, the same spot where I had once stood, and whispered softly, "You were right, Mom." Grace isn't weakness, it's power. Quiet power. And as the waves rolled in, it felt like the ocean itself carried that truth across the world that forgiveness is not surrender, healing is not forgetting, and peace is the final form of strength. Sometimes the people who break you are not your punishment, they are your preparation. Life uses pain to polish you, betrayal to build you, and endings to teach you how to begin again. Revenge might make them remember you, but forgiveness real, dignified forgiveness will make the world remember your name. Sometimes life doesn't give us the ending we hoped for, but it always gives us the strength to write our own. Grace's story reminds us that peace isn't found in revenge. It's found in reclaiming your worth. If her journey touched your heart, don't forget to give this story a like and subscribe for more stories of strength, redemption, and quiet revenge. Because somewhere out there, another heart needs to hear that it's never too late to begin again. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like. It truly helps more people find these stories. Subscribe to the channel and tap that bell icon so you never miss the next chapter of love, betrayal, and redemption. Every week, we share new emotional journeys that remind us even broken hearts can rise again.